Hello, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Monday, September 8th, 2025. One and done. Dose of LSD keeps anxiety at bay. A rigorous new study finds that a single dose of LSD can ease anxiety and depression for months. The study involved 198 adults with generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, a disabling form of anxiety that affects about 1 in 10 people over the course of a year. Participants who got lower doses of LSD, 25 or 50 micrograms, did no better than those who got a placebo. But people who received higher doses, 100 or 200 micrograms, responded quickly. A team reports in the Journal of the American Medical Association. By the next day, they were showing strong improvements, said Dr. David, a Kadima Neuropsychiatry Institute in San Diego, one of the 22 centers that participated in the study. And those improvements held out all the way to the end of the study, which was 12 weeks. But it's unclear whether some of the improvement was related to non-drug factors, like sensory environment in which people were treated, said Robin Carhart Harris, a psychedelics researcher in which people at the University of California, San Francisco, who was not involved in the study. The safety looks good, but the tolerability looks good, he says. But there's a depth of information about the way you delivered this product. Carhart Harris, like many other scientists who study psychedelics, believes that the success treatment is more likely if a person has the right mindset when beginning a trip, and if the trip occurs in a place with the right sensory environment, not your everyday anxiety. Generalized anxiety disorder involves extreme worry or dread that interferes with a person's ability to function. It's characterized by continuous worry, inability to relax, and all the physical manifestations, racing heart rates, and sweatiness. Fievel says it's also frequently accompanied by depression. Currently, antidepressant and anti-anxiety drugs are inadequate for about half of people diagnosed with GAD. So 22 outpatient psychiatric research sites agreed to test a proprietary form of LSD called MM120, which comes from the company MindMed. A drug is not at all like Prozac or Zoloft, which are among the usual treatments for GAD. This is something that is very, very distinct subjective experience, says Fievel, saying what people might call a trip. MM120, like other versions of LSD, can alter a person's perceptions and cause them to see, hear, or feel things that aren't there. The study participants were far more likely to improve if they received a dose of MM120 high enough to induce a psychedelic experience. The higher doses also were more likely to fit into a person's depression. Non-drug factors. Psychedelic treatment often involves guides or therapists who help ensure that a patient's psychedelic experience is safe and effective. In addition, treatment centers often provide rooms with soft lighting, a naturalist decor, and music or other sensory stimulation. But in this study, it's unclear whether these environmental factors played an important role in treatment. The sessions were overseen by 2 dosing session monitors, who also provided an education session before the treatment. The sessions were conducted in a private, aesthetically pleasant room, the researchers say, and participants were offered standardized music and eye shades. All of these factors have contributed to the outcome in the study protocol and could have varied greatly from one center to another. It's not to say anything about music listening, for example. when it's been present in virtually 100% of the trials that have been published to date on psychedelic therapy. It's an obvious omission, Carhart Harris says. A psychedelic future. The new research presents an emerging trend in psychedelic research. Bigger, more rigorous studies that are more likely to be supported by a pharmaceutical company. Such studies are needed to get psychedelic drugs like LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Fievel says, and giving doctors access to approved psychedelics could revolutionize treatment of psychiatric conditions ranging from depression to PTSD and addiction. Give it a couple of years and we'll be seeing drugs like psilocybin and magic mushrooms as medicines, Carhart says. A whole mindset shift is going to happen around that. The FDA seems open to that possibility. It's already given MM120 breakthrough therapy status, which is meant to speed up an evaluation of promising new drugs. MindMed, for its part, has already launched a pair of phase 3 studies of MM120. The company expects to complete those trials in 2026. Pentagon told trans troops to get diagnosed. It's using the paper trail to kick them out. Air Force Master Sergeant Logan, Ireland, with his wife and Army veteran Layla Ireland in Hawaii. 8 years ago, under President Trump's first term, Air Force Master Sergeant Logan Ireland needed a doctor's note diagnosing him with gender dysmorphia to continue serving his country. Now, that same doctor's note is the reason why he's being kicked out of the service. Earlier this year, the Pentagon included gender dysphoria as one of the medical conditions that disqualify people from military service. This policy goes further than Trump's first term and is now leaving thousands of openly trans service members, including Ireland, with no due process to save their jobs, and in some cases without the benefits they were promised. Reverse course. Before 2016, trans service members were not eligible for promotion, and their colleagues were required to refer to them by their gender assigned at birth. People who transitioned were trying to enlist were considered unfit for service. But on June 30th, 2016, that changed. President Obama's Defense Secretary, Ash Carter, lifted a ban on transgender service members, saying they could now serve openly. The reasoning that the Defense Department and the military need to avail ourselves of all talent possible in order to remain what we are now, the finest fighting force the world has ever known, Carter said. Researchers at RAND, Carter told reporters at the time, estimate that about 2,500 people out of approximately 80 to 825,000 reserve service members are transgender, with the upper end of their range of estimates around 7,000 in the active component and 4,000 in the reserves. You know, we're service members first. We all raise our right hand, we wear the same uniform, we deploy all over the world. We not only meet but exceed the standards. The only difference is we just happen to be transgender, Ireland said. But in 2017, Trump announced that the government will not allow transgender people to serve in the military. President Trump delivers his inaugural address in January 2017. Under the first Trump administration, if a trans person were already in the armed forces, they had two options: leave or get an official medical diagnosis for gender dysphoria, defined as the marked incongruence between a person's experienced gender and their gender assigned at birth. As long as they had that documented, trans service members could stay. So Ireland made an appointment with a doctor, even though he says it felt a little awkward. I've never felt necessarily dysphoric about who I am, Ireland, who works in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, says. You know, I'm Logan. I happen to be born female, but I transitioned into male, and I'm just here living my life and doing my job. In 2021, former President Biden repealed the ban, and Ireland figured the whole thing was settled. Even when Trump was re-elected a few years later, and the ban was reenacted, Ireland still thought he was safe. I figured all things would just happen like last time, that I would be grandfathered in and we could still serve, Ireland said. But the medical diagnosis was required to continue serving was now being used against him. And thanks to all those doctor's appointments back in 2017, the Pentagon had a list now. It was all documented. It doesn't seem real. It's been a feeling of being kicked down, being betrayed, Ireland said. A person held a sign supporting transgender veterans at the Unite for Veterans rally on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. in June 2025. A predetermined outcome. It's going to be a completely unfair process, says Priya Rashid, legal director of the National Institute of Military Justice Transgender Representation Project. Rashid says a few of her clients even made appointments after Trump's re-election to get a gender dysphoria diagnosis so they could be grandfathered in before the second ban took place. So we have clients that said, I wouldn't have come out. I only came out because I thought the ban was going to be the same. Rashid has been helping her clients navigate an early exit from military service. She says the ban has already been traumatic for them, but recent moves by the Air Force have added insult to injury, starting with the separation pay. In early August, the Air Force said it would deny transgender troops early retirement benefits and was moving to revoke requests already approved. Service members who have served between 15 and 18 years ordinarily would qualify for the benefits automatically. Now the transgender service members will be faced with the choice of either taking a lump sum separation payment offered to junior troops or be removed from the service. Meaning, if they try to stay and fight the ban, they get nothing. And what more, Rashid said, is that the payment comes with conditions. Pay means that you're being paid and you don't have to return it. What these people are actually getting is 0 interest early loan on their disability and their accrued entitlements. So when they get older and they're this older veteran who needs medical and financial support, they're not going to get their accrued benefits because 10 years ago, when we kicked them out, we said, here's your lump sum. Air Force Master Sergeant Logan Ireland gives a commemorative speech at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam in Hawaii, in November 2024. On top of the benefits revoked, the Air Force also recently announced that transgender airmen will no longer have the chance to argue before a board of their peers for the right to continue serving. The separation boards, which are supposed to be independent, must recommend separation of the member. If the airman has a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, according to an August 12th memo, we had no idea that when we opened that document that they were going to fundamentally change the rules of the way they conduct long-standing boards for everyone, says Rashid. And that is something I have ever seen before. That is not something that other services have ever done before. This document really showcased that the rules are not going to apply to these people. They will not be given a fair trial. The outcome will be predetermined based on the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. The new rules also prohibit any recordings or hearings or the use of court reporters. Rashid says that's illegal. In the Administrative Procedure Act, they are required to provide appeals. She says the transcript is the mechanism of appeal. So that's like a First Amendment and Fifth Amendment right of the public. NPR reached out to the Air Force to comment, but they have not responded. A broken deal. Mick Wagner, founder and executive director of Veterans Legal Support Network, says denying benefits after years of service sets a bad precedent. You know, it's a fundamental break with the quid pro quo promise of, you know, you serve, there's some benefits on the end of that. And that's just a fundamental breaking of that social contract, if you will, that the military has. Wagner points out that even for those who don't qualify for early retirement, there's still plenty at stake. Joining the military to pay for college is a common incentive. And if a service member is pushed out before a certain year of enlistment, they'll end up having to pay back that tuition. Overall, Wagner says the cumbersome effort to identify and remove transgender troops hurts mission readiness. The priority named in the executive action that banned them. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has listed the lethality, meritocracy, warfighting, and accountability and readiness as his top priorities in the armed forces. Wagner says this effort is counterproductive to those values. I think you just cut your nose to spite your face. You've got this enterprise in so many fields. I've got a friend of mine. She's a lieutenant colonel in the Marines. She was enlisted. She transitioned. She fought in Fallujah, so you know when you talk to warfighters, people who actually fought, and she did. Ireland, meanwhile, is trying to plan his future without his long-time career or the retirement pay he was counting on. He served in the Air Force for 15 years, met his wife there, served in Afghanistan, and moved his family many times. It was his life. I look around my house. I look at the tattoos on my arms. And my heart just breaks, he says. It breaks because I gave so much of my life to the service. It's a core part of who I am. Why solar flares are way hotter than researchers thought. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory, which watches the sun constantly, captured an image of a mid-level solar flare on January 12th, 2015. Beautiful, yet dangerous solar flares that erupt from the sun could be as hot as 180 million degrees Fahrenheit, researchers say. That's more than 6 times hotter than solar physicists previously believed, according to a new report in Astrophysical Journal Letters. Alexander Russell, a physicist with the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, called the temperature a crazy number that he and his colleagues found incredible. Solar flares occur when magnetic energy gets suddenly released and dumped into particles. These particles, ions and electrons, get heated up and shoot out at great speed. Previously, researchers used telescopes to measure the temperature of electrons in solar flares, and we've kind of just assumed, well, the ion temperature would be the same as the electron temperature, says Russell. But recent computer simulations and measurements in near-Earth space suggest that this assumption is wrong. They show that ions heat up way more. Russell and his colleagues did some calculations and found that solar flares could actually be over 100 million degrees Fahrenheit and quite possibly hotter. James Drakes, a physicist at the University of Maryland who wasn't part of the research team, has been studying how magnetic processes heat and speed up electrons and ions for some time now. He says until now, the difference between the two has been overlooked when it comes to solar flares. We've been confronting the solar physicists, says Drake, telling them that even though they've measured in a lot of detail what's going on with the electrons, they're missing something big. That's why he says he was happy to see this new analysis, as it could lead to a better understanding of how solar flares work, and that in turn could help protect hardware like satellites and people like astronauts from these dangerous but awesome eruptions. We're already busy on the next steps, says Russell, who says they're developing models of how flares evolve when the ions are heated more strongly than the electrons. The silent killer increases your risk of stroke and dementia. Here's how to control it. By age 40, more than half of Americans have high blood pressure, but many aren't aware of it. Hypertension has long been known as the silent killer. When it's left untreated, it can be deadly, and is considered a silent threat since most people have no symptoms. You can't feel the pressure in your blood vessels increasing. New recommendations from the American Heart Association aim for early treatment, including lifestyle changes and medications. Once systolic blood pressure rises above 130 by 80 mmHg, which stands for millimeters of mercury, a measure of pressure. Experts say it's clear that the sooner you take action, the more you can protect yourself. Hypertension is a leading cause of heart disease, which is the number one cause of death of both men and women in the U.S. High blood pressure also increases the risk of kidney disease and dementia. And research shows that hypertension can lead to damage in small blood vessels in the brain, which is linked to cognitive decline. There's a really enormous preventative health opportunity in treating hypertension early, says Jordan Cohen, a nephrologist and hypertension specialist at the University of Pennsylvania. She says millions of adults in the U.S. could benefit from medications and lifestyle changes. If you catch it early and treat it early, you can end up with many more years of healthy life expectancy. Cohen says, pointing at a reduced risk of heart attacks, strokes, kidney damage, and dementia. The new guidelines points to a decades-old advice about the benefits of low-sodium diet, which can be challenging to follow, given that more than half the calories consumed in the U.S. come from ultra-processed foods, which tend to be high in salt. The new guidelines also emphasize lifestyle strategies, including exercise, limiting alcohol consumption, and stress reduction in the form of meditation, yoga, or deep breathing. For those with systolic blood pressure, the upper number in the 130s, the recommendation is to start with these diet and lifestyle related changes, then move to medication if blood pressure doesn't improve. For people who hit the risky range of systolic blood pressure of 140 or higher, which is considered stage 2 hypertension, evidence shows that starting on the high blood pressure medications is beneficial. For all people with blood pressure over 140/90, we recommend beginning with 2 medications. Dr. Dan Jones, chair of the Guideline Writing Committee of the Heart Association, told NPR. Research shows one medication alone is not enough to lower pressure to the optimal range, he says. Jones says even when people are aware they have hypertension, more than half don't manage to lower it to the normal range, which is 120/80, or lower. Some of the challenges include side effects of the medications and individual differences in how well the medication works, as well as an unwillingness to take medicines among some people. In addition, some people struggle with the everyday hurdles of making lifestyle changes. Jones points out that healthcare providers also use a risk calculator to estimate a person's individual risk of heart disease as part of a treatment plan. When George Solomon was told that the risk of high blood pressure, he was hesitant to take medications. I felt fine, he says. Then at age 63, he had a stroke. Solomon had retired from a career in law enforcement and was settling into a new routine, making time for exercise and hobbies, such as splitting wood on his farm. One day in the spring 2023, he started to feel off. He went upstairs to watch TV, and when I sat down in the chair, I couldn't get back up. I had a sensation that came up across my back, he recalls, and he lost feeling in his arm and leg. An ambulance took him to Duke University Hospital near his home, where he underwent treatment and rehab for a stroke. He estimates that he's now about 80% recovered and back to exercising and working on his farm. He realizes now that he needs healthy lifestyle habits and medications to prevent another stroke. I feel I'm on the right path, he says. He's lost weight and he's doing more cardio and strength training. He shares his story in hopes that it encourages others to take actions. Medications. What's out there? What's coming? There are several types of medications used to treat hypertension. They include diuretics that help the body get rid of extra salt and water. ACE inhibitors that help block the production of hormones called angiotensin II and help relax the blood vessels, and calcium channel blockers that slow down the movement of calcium into cells, which can help lower pressure. But many people with hypertension don't get enough reduction with current medications. And the University of Pennsylvania, Cohen says there's a lot of interest in a new class of medication. That works by targeting the hormone aldosterone, which helps regulate fluid and sodium in the body. Too much of the hormone is one cause of high blood pressure. The drug is not yet on the market, but new study results could pave the way for a new treatment option. In hypertension, we haven't seen anything new that's effective since the 90s, Cohen says. So another tool in the toolkit for treatment could be beneficial, she says. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that the aldosterone blocking drug known as Baxdrostat was effective in lowering blood pressure in many people who have difficulty controlling their hypertension. The study included about 800 people who, despite taking 2 or 3 medications, still had not lowered their blood pressure to the normal range. What we saw is that after 12 weeks of treatment, there was about a 10-point improvement in blood pressure in the patients treated with Baxdrostat over the placebo effect. Dr. Jennifer Brown, a cardiologist in Brigham and the Women's Hospital, who is one of the researchers behind the study, told NPR the study was authorized by a drug maker, AstraZeneca, who plans to share its data with regulatory authorities by the end of the year. A 10-point drop in systolic blood pressure is linked to about 20% reduction in the risk of heart attacks and strokes, and also a decreased risk of dementia.